When I was asked about 2 months ago now if I wanted to preach on June 22nd, I did not hesitate to say yes, I would. If I had been a sensible person, I would have taken a look at the lectionary and suddenly remembered I was going to be out of town that weekend. The story of Hagar and Ishmael in the wilderness is one that we don't often tell, and there's a good reason for that. It's unpleasant, it's sticky, and really no one wants to explain it. I could get up here and talk about why I think Sarah does what she does, why she thinks that Ishmael poses an unacceptable risk to the inheritance of her son, Isaac. And to be honest, part of me wants to do that. I don't want Sarah, that motherly old woman from my children's Bible, to be the bad guy here. The fact is, though, that we can't make excuses for Sarah. Her reasons for casting out Hagar and Ishmael are ultimately selfish, and they're not selfish in the small, mostly harmless way that all of us are selfish every day. The consequences of what she does for Hagar could have been absolutely catastrophic. Sarah, after all, doesn't have God's promise that all will be well. That's Abraham. It is to Abraham that God comes and says, "Don't worry, I will make a great nation of Ishmael. Ishmael is your offspring. You have my promise." No. Now, it's probably worth mentioning here that Muslims trace their descent from Abraham through Ishmael, and that for that reason, this story is of great importance in the Muslim faith. Of course, Abraham has only the vaguest understanding of that, and Sarah has none at all. We can only conclude that for Sarah, what happens to Hagar and Ishmael after they are cast out is of little importance. To Hagar, though, it was, of course, of the greatest importance. The foundation of Hagar's world has been ripped out from under her. We live in a culture where it's entirely normal to watch a family member move hundreds of miles away in search of a better job, and we can't really fully understand, I think, what exile would have meant to Hagar. Going out into the wilderness as she does is dangerous. This story shows that very well. But it's also a disgrace. In dismissing Hagar and Ishmael, Abraham is dismissing their worth as human beings. He's saying, you really just aren't worth the trouble of keeping around. My wife would be angry, my wife would complain about it, the whole thing, it would give me a big headache. Go. And so Hagar goes. Hagar really has no choice. She sets off into the wilderness with a loaf of bread, a skin of water, and her son. And the story doesn't say where she's headed. Maybe she had a plan, somewhere she was going, where she would be safe. But maybe she didn't. I don't really know. If she did have a plan, it certainly wasn't realized in the way that she intended it to be. Before very long, Hagar's bread is all eaten, her skin of water is dry, and her son is in such dire straits that all she can think of to do is lay him down in the slight shade of a bush and wait for him to die. Of course, Hagar, like any mother, doesn't want to watch her child die, so she walks away. She walks far enough away that she won't have to hear him cry out. And she prays. She says, "Lord, do not let me look upon the death of the child." She's there, she's alone in the wilderness with only her dying son. She's hungry and she's thirsty and she's desperate. And that's what she prays. "Lord, do not let me look upon the death of the child." When I was a kid, I used to pray regularly for snow days. But I never prayed for snow days on days when there was snow in the forecast because I thought that would jinx it. No. I prayed for snow days in May, June, September, because I was raised to treat prayer as a way of expressing wishes. It might be impolite to ask for birthday presents starting in February when your birthday is in September, and if you send too long a letter to Santa Claus, you won't get anything for Christmas. But God is different. In prayer, you can ask God for anything you want. That isn't Hagar's understanding of prayer, though. Hagar, again, is a slave. Her life up until this point would have consisted of far too much asking without receiving. So in this terrible situation, with no one to turn to but God, she plays her cards pretty close to the vest. She doesn't ask for anything crazy. She doesn't ask for Ishmael to live. All she asks is that she might not have to watch him die. And I don't doubt that many of us have prayed for some crazy things in our lives. For snow in June or in September. I also don't doubt that we've all had our moments when our prayers sound a lot more like Hagar's. Sometimes things are going so well that snow in the summer is all we can think of to ask for. Other times, naming all the things we need God to deliver us from is no more plausible than counting all the stars in the sky. We all have our prayers for those times, and I'm not going to pretend I know what yours is. But I think a lot of them boil down to, Lord, I just need to make it through this day. But the story of Hagar is proof that God doesn't need any more from us than that. Our God is not a trickster who responds to all our prayers as if they were meant literally. There's no need to be careful of your words when you pray, because God answers the spirit of our prayers. God answers Hagar's desperation. He answers the cries of Ishmael. He opens Hagar's eyes and she sees a well. She fills up her water skin. For the first time since leaving Abraham and Sarah, probably for the first time in a long time before that, she rests. Sometimes we all think our prayers aren't worth praying. When we're in the wilderness, we easily lose sight of this peculiar idea we're taught, this crazy notion that we can ask God for anything. I think we tend in this church to be practical-minded people, and we have this little concern that, I don't want to tie up the heavenly phone lines. We hear this voice in the back of our head saying, no one cares about your problems, and that voice scares us. That voice is the voice of a world that demands that we act like everything's going great all the time, even when it's not. Because if everything's not going great, then that means there's something wrong with you. But it's not God's voice. God's voice is the one we hear in this morning's gospel reading, the voice that says, it's all right. Every hair on your head is counted. I care about you. You are of more value than many sparrows. And I'm sure that it must have shocked Hagar to her very core to know that she had value to God. I'm sure it shocks all of us to think that God has the time or the desire to count all the hairs on our heads. But we have to remember that it doesn't shock God. God didn't just find out yesterday, to his great dismay, that humanity is actually kind of all right after all. No. God said to Abraham that all would be well for Hagar and for Ishmael, and it was. God knew from the very beginning that this story was going to end in life and not in death. Thanks be to God. Amen.